Initially designed in the early 1900s for loggers who needed the absolute toughest boots that could possibly be made, because one wrong step meant a broken leg or broken ankle, one failed stitch meant days without pay. So these boots needed to be the absolute toughest, most rugged, most durable boots that humans could make, which gave them a very distinct look and really unique features, which includes ridiculously thick leather for ankle support, narrow toe boxes to lock your feet in the boots, high arches to support your foot on long days with heavy loads, ridiculously high heels to build up that arch and keep the boot out of the muck, and more leather underneath your foot than any other boot or shoe we've seen. Over 500 or 600 boots and shoes dissected. They call this style of footwear the Pacific Northwest boot. So then what is the history of this boot? Well, eventually this style of boot, through the White's Boot Company, would eventually make it west during the green gold rush of the logging industry of the early 1900s. The Pacific Northwest forests were unlike anything any logger had seen before, due to the Pacific Northwest essentially being a rainforest. The trees were unbelievably tall, the brush and deadfall was almost impassably thick, and the steepness of the terrain would test even the strongest logger's resolve. And this extreme terrain would increase the demand for this style of boot, and as new industries like firefighting, construction, and other heavy-duty industries eventually saw the value of arguably the toughest boot in the entire world. And over the last 100 years, multiple stores across the West carried this style of boots, like Baker's Boots, that was established in 1918 as a workwear clothing store. But over time, as manufacturing techniques and materials improved to make things faster and cheaper, in contrast, this style of boot slowly became more and more expensive. So in 2020, due to all the complications of COVID, Drews saw the need for a more affordable Pacific Northwest boot, and in 2022, they released the Drews Logger boot. So what is this boot? Well, the brand is Drews. The style is the 10-inch logger. They weigh 3 pounds, 5 ounces each boot. So collectively, it's over 6 pounds of boots, which is ridiculous. They retail for $399. They're made in Mexico, and the way they position this product is every pair of Drews boots is built by master craftsmen, many with decades of experience, some third-generation shoemakers. Using time-tested old-world techniques, these leather boots are hand-lasted and made from the finest components sourced worldwide. And as for what we're lightly comparing these two, because this is not gonna be a full, comprehensive, every single Pacific Northwest layer, compared and contrasted, who makes the best boot, we're gonna look at the general Pacific Northwest boot. So we're gonna use that as the baseline to compare the Drews to, and cut it in half, run it through all of our tests to finally figure out, is this Drews boot as good as the Pacific Northwest brands? Why is it cheaper? And ultimately, what is the difference between a made in Mexico Pacific Northwest boot compared to a made in Spokane Pacific Northwest boot? So now let's start going through this thing and figure out why and how they made this boot for $400. One super big obvious one is the fact that these are made in Mexico, because a big part of what makes a PNW boot is the fact that they're made in the PNW. And US labor is more expensive, and the PNW brands manufacture in-house with very old school techniques, hand lasting, hand nailing, hand sanding, everything is done by hand. But at the same time, Mexico is arguably the boot capital of the entire world. So they're more equipped to make boots, they have more experience, and they're better at making boots at scale with faster techniques with cheaper labor. So at least a chunk of the cost difference comes from that difference between US labor cost and Mexico labor cost. But I don't think that accounts for all $200 difference between these two styles of boots. So do they need to cut some corners to get that price savings down? Well, let's look at the leather first, because a big part of what makes the PNW boot so popular is how thick the leather is. Most footwear, you're gonna see anywhere from 1 to 2 millimeters thick. Most work boots, you're gonna see 2 to 2.5 millimeters thick. PNW boots start at 2.5 millimeters and go all the way up to 3.5 millimeters. So how's that compare to the Drews boots? Well, this stuff comes in at a very hardy 3.2 millimeters thick. And look at the cross section, plenty of the grain, with the burn test, it acts about the same. It's nearly identical leather. It has a little bit more of a sheen to it than some of the other leathers from the brands, but it's the same tannery, it's the same thickness, it's basically the same leather. Another one of the distinguishing features of a PNW boot is how narrow they are. You know, these boots, they date back 100 plus years. It's back when they basically were using dress shoes for work. Everything was really pointy, everything was really narrow, but with some function too, because that narrow shape really locks your foot in. Like case in point, like when your foot is in there, there's not a lot of room in there to be sliding around side to side. And so when you're side hilling, when you're out logging and you got crazy terrain, deadfall, you don't want a lot of slop on the inside. So Pacific Northwest boots are notoriously narrow. Probably the most popular last that these boots are built on is the famous 55 last. And this last has been popular since the 1930s because of how supportive it is and how high the arch is, and it just has a nice aesthetic look to it. So you can literally see that wedge of arch support in this cross section. So what did Drews do? Well, they took that exact same 55 last and tried to solve the problem that basically everyone has with that last. So what they did is they expanded the width width of the last by 1/8 of an inch and increase the height. So you have a lot more volume on the inside of the boot to still hold your foot pretty snug, but have plenty of leather and plenty of room for it to bulge out and to give you a little more comfort while still being supportive. And it makes a difference. Like wearing the two different styles of boots with a regular 55 and the Drew's wider 55, it feels a lot more comfortable to me. I don't like having my toes squished all day. And speaking of that high arch, I'm not exaggerating. It is the most ridiculous arch out of any boots that I've ever worn. You know, people are like, oh, Red Wings have a really high arch. They say it's like standing on a roll of quarters because that's exactly how it feels. It takes like months to break in and beat down that arch support to where it actually conforms to your foot. And you compare this profile to any modern boot, and the modern boot is significantly flatter. And the reason they do this is they're making a lot more at scale that needs to accommodate a lot more feet and decrease returns, because these Pacific Northwest brands are plagued with returns because of how tough that arch is, how tough the leather is, how narrow the toe boxes are. And so did Drew's solve the problem of the really high arch? No, it's still ridiculous. It still takes a long time to break in. It's crazy arch support. It's gonna beat your feet up for a few weeks. And I think that's just something that really can't be solved with this style of construction that we'll go over in a bit because of all the layers of leather they have to build up. And the way that they build up this much arch support is through this really high heel. You need to have some height in the heel to give your foot the ability to drop down into that arch support. And it's basically the exact same way they build up the arch support of a cowboy boot, but just even more redundant and even thicker. But we don't know for sure what's on the inside of this. Is it all the exact same layers? Is it built the same? Is there little corners cut? We'll see when we get it cut in half. And really the last thing to go over is how these boots are built or the construction. Because one of the things that really blew me away a few years ago when I first covered the PNW brands was how redundant everything is. Modern boots are usually just glued together or direct injected, where PNW boots have a 270 stitch down construction where that upper is flared out and sewn all the way down, even on some of these boots, all the way through the outsole. And then at the heel, they're nailed together with big nails of various heights and various reasons to lock the heel into place, to lock the insole in place. The first time I dissected one of these, there's over 80 nails in each boot. That's a big part of the reason why they're like 3 to 3.5 pounds. They're also glued together with the heaviest duty contact cement. They even have screws in the sole, screwing the sole together on top of having the thread going through, on top of having nails through the construction, on top of having glue. They're the most redundant over the top built boots that I've ever seen. So how does that compare to the Drews? Well, they clearly have that 270-degree stitch down construction, clearly have the nailed heel. They've got the screws all the way through the outsole. But what's interesting is instead of all that sewing going all the way through the outsole or not at all, Drews does a really interesting thing where one stitch line of the stitch down construction goes through the upper down through the midsole, and then the other one goes all the way through the outsole. And what that does is it allows you to protect one stitching all the way through, where most of these other boots you wear through it within the first few wears, but honestly it's mostly the column of thread that holds it together more than the actual stitch itself. You're always gonna have that hidden locked in stitch no matter how much you wear this outsole down. And so when it comes to resoling, you'll also still have that structural stitch holding everything together when you go to resole it. And so it really is a smarter way of doing it. But there is a difference between these boots in the materials they use, because the thread on the Drews is quite a bit thinner than the thread on the other PNW brands. Is it a big enough difference that's gonna completely dissuade someone from buying it? No, but it's still something to consider. You know, depending on what your work is and how heavy duty your work is, you might want a little bit thicker thread. And every other component that we didn't cover is basically identical. The outsoles are the same, the eyelets are the same, the heel stacks are almost identical, the leather midsole, the rubber midsole, even down to the eyelets and the laces are almost identical. Why is a made in Mexico boot made from almost the exact same components as the made in the US PNW boots? That's because the vast majority of components, especially the veg tan components on the inside of the made in the US PNW boots, are sourced from Mexico. And so in all reality, having this made in Mexico without having to pay the import fees, without having to pay shipping, and using components that are sourced from Mexico for a boot being made in Mexico, because allegedly it's basically exact replica of a Pacific Northwest boot down to the components and where they're sourced, but made in Mexico. That's what we need to figure out. So let's cut these in half and finally answer, are they identical on the inside? Is it really built like a PNW boot, or is it all just one big sham? 3 reasons why our coil collaboration is twice the shoe and half the price of the world famous Common Projects. Number 1, significantly better leather. Number 2, instead of all this foam and cardboard filler on the inside, we actually use vegetable tan leather for the insole. And number 3, for the first time that we've ever seen, we did that strobel stitch construction with that vegetable tan leather insole. And no one had ever done that before, so unique. They sold out almost immediately last time, and they're back in stock on Thursday, so sign up below. All right, we got them cut in half, and if you're not subscribed, consider pushing the little subscribe button. If you want to help fund this, where we're cutting apart and comparing hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of shoes and boots every single week, check out our handmade leather goods we make right here in the shop that taught me everything I know about leatherworking to be able to judge footwear like this. Check out our collaborations where we actually work with every single one of these Pacific Northwest brands on collaborations. And those are a huge part of how we're able to fund this and do this. So check those out below, and thank you guys for all your support. So now, let's finally see what's inside Drew's Logger boots. So what's the actual difference? And now that we have it cut in half and we can see everything on the inside, not much. They're basically identical. And even when I'm planning this video, I keep getting them confused. I'm grabbing one and thinking it's this brand. I'm like, oh wait, that's the wrong brand. And that's because they clearly use almost the exact same components all the way through the construction. It has the exact same heel stack of leather, the exact same outsole, the same full length veg tan leather midsole, the same leather shank, the exact same arch support wedge. And then they also have that veg tan insole, but this is your pre-molded one that I honestly don't know what that does or doesn't do. Just like a quick bend test, it feels a little bit more flexible. I'm not even sure what that does. Then you have almost the exact same heel counter, but this is even thicker. And honestly, like for me and I don't do heavy duty work in this style of boot. They're too thick for me. And this Drew's is even thicker than the PNW brands. Even the lining is almost identical. It's maybe a little bit cheaper than some of the other ones, and some of the other brands use full grain, some use suede. It's a little bit all over the place with linings. But one of the biggest differences that you can't even get in any of the Pacific Northwest brands, I don't even know if you can actually special request it, and it's this veg tan toe stiffener. Every other PNW brand either comes with a soft toe, a Celastic toe, or a safety toe. I don't even think they offer a leather toe stiffener. But again, keep in mind, it's one of these things where it's not the biggest difference between these two boots. You're gonna have a structured toe that's gonna be a little bit more structured. It's still gonna bulge out. But functionally, it's not like it's a $200 difference. But I still would rather have that veg tan toe stiffener. They even went so far as to put a cork filling between the insole and the midsole. And this style of construction doesn't even need a cork filling, because usually that's saved for Goodyear welt construction where there's a void created by the Goodyear welt, whereas stitch down construction is completely flat. But one of the common issues with PNW brands is they're notorious for squeaking. And the brands try to solve that in various ways with canvas or with foam or with rubber, but Drew's took it the extra step and put a cork filling in there. Once again, not the biggest difference, not a make or break thing, but it is a unique little difference between this and the $200 plus difference of the PNW brands. So then what's worse in the Drew's compared to the other PNW brands? Honestly, I think these boots are probably made from the exact same materials, made the exact same way, from the same suppliers in Mexico. One group is just made in the US and really handmade. The other is made in Mexico, still very handmade, but I think they've streamlined the processes a little bit more. But looking at them, I don't think most people that are huge boot nerds could look at these and tell me which one is which. They're nearly identical. But at the same time, that's probably the biggest difference of all between these boots. Is that one of the most important things to some people is the fact that these PNW boots made for the Pacific Northwest are still made in the Pacific Northwest. And Drew's, even though they've been around for over 100 years reselling boots and working with some of these brands, the Drew's loggers are not made in the United States. They're a US style of boot that's made in Mexico. And Drew's has only been making this style of boot for 3 years, and no matter how perfect or how old the style of construction is, there's always gonna be issues with supplies, quality control, and issues with the processes that maybe don't manifest until months and months into wearing the boots. And so you're always taking a gamble on a new startup brand compared to a time-honored brand that still is worth their salt. But at the same time, there's some distinct advantages with going with Drew's, because not everybody can afford a $600 to $700 boot. Not everybody wants to wait 6 months to a year to get their boots. And some of the brands do have ready-to-ship options and faster timelines, but that seems to be the #1 problem that plagues the PNW brand. And some people are not gonna wait around for that, and they'd rather save $200 to get one they can get right now. But at the end of the day, are you getting a PNW boot from Drew's made in Mexico? Yes, clearly you are. And the biggest thing to me is the fact that a lot of these components are sourced from Mexico anyway, and they're probably using the exact same stuff. The upper leather is from the exact same tannery and is basically the exact same specs. And so if you do want a pair of Drew's, check them out, the links in my description. If you want to see the other videos that I've done of these Pacific Northwest brands, standalone videos, I'll put those below. Thank you guys so much for all your support. That's what makes all this possible. Check out our handmade leather goods below. Check out our collaborations where we worked with all 3 of these brands. And give us a like, give us a subscribe, because that's how we do this, and we couldn't do it without your support. So thank you guys. See ya. I just want to go home.